Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 391, A Short Celebration. The horseback riding students couldn't stop talking about how impressed they were with Heidi. But as they continued to sing her praises, a few of the boys in the crowd started trying to talk up their actions in the fight, hoping to impress her. Heidi was so amazing. She's so fast with that sword. She's incredible for a girl. But I had to get in there and start taking care of things myself, No sword for me, I just use my teeth. I've never kicked anybody so hard in my life. I learned something new about myself today. I got a couple hits in at their leader, that yellow-haired guy. I think I did all right. They edged nearer and nearer to her, hoping she would notice one of them and be impressed. But Heidi just smiled faintly at all of them, refusing to pay any more attention to one than another. Yes, I saw you all. Everybody did a good job. The students were all very excited, even by this faint praise. Any compliment from the mouth of such an amazing girl felt like a huge honor. One student pressed a hand down over a wound on his arm to hide it and grinned at her. It was worth getting hurt if meeting her was part of the deal. We all fought well, but there was one person who just stood by doing nothing. One voice called over the noise. Heidi scowled. Yes, I know what you mean. She only glanced briefly in Alex's direction, but it was just enough to direct more attention his way. Several people in the crowd of students turned to look at Alex and began giving him puzzled and contemptuous looks. Debbie was still at Alex's side, and she glared back at the crowd, confused by the change in their attitude. They began muttering to each other as they realized that Alex had not joined the fight or tried to help them. Did he really just stand there the whole time? That's ridiculous. I recognize him. Wasn't he just in some big fight? Maybe he only bothers when there's cameras around. Maybe he's tired from his big fight. Please, does he look tired to you? Debbie wrinkled her nose and tugged at the corner of Alex's coat. Well, it looks like she's okay now. Let's get out of here. She worried that Alex might do something rash if the crowd irritated him too much. However, the more Alex studied martial arts, the more patient and calm he found himself to be in situations like this. Gossip and chatter didn't bother him as much as they used to. Alex turned and gave her a sweet smile, as if to assure her that he was fine. One of the students, a young girl, stepped forward and began speaking out on his behalf. That's not fair. We fought today, but what about the last time that gang came and took our money? Remember that boy whose leg was broken? Which one of you stepped forward then? I just think Her voice began to falter as she realized her classmates were all glaring at her sternly. What are you criticizing us for? One person griped. Yesterday was different. We had our reasons. Well, maybe he had his reasons too. That's all I'm trying to say. The students began to debate amongst themselves. Some agreed that Alex wasn't necessarily obligated to jump in and fight on their behalf, while others still felt he should have done it anyway. Heidi watched them bicker grimly. She was still angry that Alex had refused to help. The gang's leader, Mickey, had gone so far as to put a knife on her throat, and Alex hadn't lifted a finger. Of course, she had been more than capable of handling this situation, but he couldn't have known that. She had seen his fight on TV and imagined him to be an amazing, heroic superhuman figure. She had hung around the riding yard for hours, hoping to run into him and get to talk with him. but he had turned out to be a huge disappointment. She began to wonder if the amazing fight she had seen on TV was even real. Maybe it had all been staged, and Alex was worthless. She drew herself up and said in a condescending tone, "All right, that's enough. Don't bully him. He's clearly not able to do much to be helpful. Just because everyone else managed to be brave today doesn't mean he can automatically do the same." Alex watched her impassively. He knew it wasn't worth getting into a fight with her over something so silly. But at Heidi's words, many of the people in the crowd backed off. Even the girls who had been trying to defend him fell back. One of the students turned to Heidi with a winning smile. "You're right. We shouldn't waste any more time here. Why don't we go do something fun? You're coming with us, right?" He phrased it as if the entire group would be hanging out together, but in his mind, he was asking her for a date. Before Heidi could answer, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps trampling the field behind them. She glanced behind her, and her eyes went wide with surprise. "They're back already?" It hadn't occurred to any of the students that the gang would return quickly to take revenge. A car drove up behind the group and squealed to a halt as the rest of the gang members ran to catch up to it. The door opened, revealing Mickey in the passenger seat. His broken leg was already wrapped up in a makeshift bandaging, and he gripped a pair of crutches. He glared at the students, then shouted to the rest of his men, "Yeah, this is them all right." The gang members had the students surrounded in an instant. There seemed to be hundreds of them, all dressed in black, with weapons glinting menacingly in their hands. The students were dumbfounded at how quickly things had turned against them. Mickey hopped awkwardly out of the car. Everyone was too frightened to laugh. "These people," he swept a crutch out to gesture to the group of students, "tried to hurt us, and they all still owe us money." The students cringed, trying to hide behind one another. Episode 392, Money and Respect. Mickey glared at the students as if daring them to speak up. But what he was really looking for was a spokesperson to pick on. "Come on, hurry up. Who's going to answer me?" As he said this, the rest of the gang members raised their weapons as if preparing to strike. The students were consumed with fear. Just moments ago, they had been reveling in their victory over the gang. Now they were back to square one. "Well, what's wrong? Why is everyone so shy all of a sudden, huh?" At Mickey's signal, a gang member picked a student at random and punched them hard in the stomach. The student doubled over, coughing and retching, and the gang member kicked them again, sending them sprawling on the grass. Heidi watched all of this carefully, keeping her face neutral. She realized that this new group of fighters Mickey had brought to them were not amateur thugs like the ones she had beaten up before. These were trained fighters. She thought through their options as quickly as she could. It seemed like fighting wouldn't work this time. She would need to find another way to safely get them out of this. She tried to think of an argument they could use to talk their way out of this situation. Her brow creased in sympathy as she watched the student Mickey had picked at random to suffer and struggle to stand. She felt horrible that things had turned against them all so quickly. Before anyone could decide what to do, Mickey pointed to another random student. The fighter revealed a knife and held it to the student's throat. This was one of the students who, just minutes before, had been angry at Alex for not joining the fight. All of his bravados were gone now. His legs were shaking so hard, He felt as though he was going to melt into the floor. He felt something wet around his legs, and he couldn't tell if it was sweat or if he had wet himself. The air was tense. It felt as if hardly anyone amongst the students was even breathing. He took a shaky breath and said, We were wrong? We were really wrong. We shouldn't have. I'll pay. I can pay you money if you just don't hurt me. It was clear from his tone that this was not an idle promise. He sounded like he could afford to pay Mickey a great deal. His offer inspired some of the other students who were also quite wealthy. Even though they had been proud of themselves for fighting back, that was before Mickey had procured hundreds of armed fighters to support him. Now fighting felt ridiculous. One by one, the wealthier students fell to their knees and began to beg to be allowed to pay Mickey off. Those who had criticized Alex for not joining the fight felt foolish. They raised their voices over each other, begging Mickey to let them go. Heidi watched them all critically. She understood their fear, but she still felt somewhat contemptuous toward them. She stood tall. She was determined to find a way out of this with her dignity intact. More students were starting to join those who knelt on the ground. Even though they were not as rich as some of their classmates, they still figured it was better to lose some money than to die. Some of them suspected that simply begging for forgiveness would probably be enough on its own to get them out of there. The first student to offer money, who was still standing with a knife to his throat, slowly reached into his wallet to pull out a credit card. He held it out to Mickey, offering it to him. To his surprise, Mickey slapped the card out of his hand, sending it flying. "It must be great to have money, huh?" he yelled. "You just flash a credit card and all your problems go away. Is that how it's always worked for you?" The students were stunned. Many of them had been convinced that money would solve the issue. Having their money rejected was yet another humiliation. With an ugly sneer, Mickey struck the student with his crutches, knocking his legs out from under him. "You thought you could take us on," he roared. "You don't even think about the consequences. And you think you can just fix it with money? What about respect? Show me that." He swung his crutches out wildly, striking students at random. The students screamed, ducking and crawling to try to get out of his way. The first student who had offered money gasped out, Please forgive us. I understand what you mean, but this is what I can give you. Please give us a chance. I'm offering you property, money, anything." He babbled on incoherently, making wild offers in exchange for his safety. Finally, Mickey tired himself out. It was difficult to hit people when he only had one good leg to stand on. He let himself come to a stop, air puffing in and out of his lungs. "Fine," he panted. "I get it. Money is the only thing that makes sense to you people. Fine." He turned to the rest of the students. "So you're all just desperate to give us money, huh?" The fighters glared at the students, who began nodding as hard as they could. Yes, we'll pay." "All right, we can play that game. Your lives are worth more than money, I'm sure. Since there's so many of you, I'm sure it won't be any problem to give us $1 billion. Give us that much, then you can leave. No problem, right?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. They had each been imagining numbers in the thousands. Mickey's demand blew their estimations out of the water. The students looked at each other fearfully. There were no poor people amongst them, but they were not that rich either. Some of them knew that their families had decent assets, but they had no idea if all their money put together would total $1 billion. They knew it would be incredibly dangerous now to suggest the total Mickey wanted was too much. The first person to speak would probably be struck down or even killed. None of them wanted to risk angering him again. Episode 393, Rapid Calculations. Mickey glared at them all and roared, "Well, are you idiots finished doing the math or not? Where's the money?" Wait! The students waved their arms, trying to appease him with desperate smiles. "We have to discuss it. It's a lot to coordinate." Yeah, we have to call our banks, make transfers, all that stuff. Another one tried to laugh. It came out like a shriek. Mickey rolled his eyes. "Geez, you people begged to pay us and now you're dragging your feet. Hey, Sonny, get your watch out. Time them. I want to see how long it takes them to figure out what they're doing." Sonny was the fighter who had drawn his knife on the student. Now he tucked his knife away and produced a watch. He looked down at it blankly, intent on nothing else but keeping track of time. Meanwhile, some of the gang members went into the racecourse office and brought out some chairs. When Mickey saw what they were doing, he glanced back to the car he had arrived in. There seemed to be someone else sitting inside, someone who did not want to reveal their face just yet. At some unseen signal from them, Mickey accepted one of the chairs, settling his broken leg in front of him with a wince. The student who had first offered to pay money was called Ted Young. He was the oldest son of his family and was generally well-liked amongst the students. He wanted desperately to get out of there. So he said to them all in dismay, "We have to figure this out. We just have to." A small group formed around him. They pitched ideas to each other for how to raise the money in frantic whispers. As they spoke, they each kept glancing at Heidi. She seemed calm and unafraid, despite the startling turn of events. "What about you, Heidi? Can you offer anything?" Ted asked her. He had completely given up on his pride at this point. One student tried to do the math on their phone, calculating the number of students there were and how much each would have to contribute to reach their goal of $1 billion. Another commented bitterly, "It's a pretty great trap, you've got to admit. I bet they do this all the time. There's no way we can get out of here without paying." "I know," said Ted. "It's the best way. We can't take on this many people. We have to pay." Some of the students had been holding out hope that someone would come up with a different idea. As more and more of their classmates began to agree that money was the only way out, a feeling of despair settled over the group. They couldn't believe they had gotten stuck in such a horrible situation just for trying to go out and enjoy some horseback riding. Finally, Heidi decided it was time to speak. She had been deep in thought since Ted had asked her if she had any money to contribute. "The thing is," she said, "even if we put together $1 billion right now, what's to stop them from asking for more money? They'll just keep extorting us for more and more. We shouldn't give it to them." Ted quickly gestured for Heidi to lower her voice. He didn't want the gang to overhear what she was saying. "Heidi, what choice do we have?" he whispered back to her. "It's not like we're just giving up all this money for fun. What else are we supposed to do?" "Yeah, there's really no other way," another student chimed in. "We're all on the same side. Why are we arguing? Money is a peaceful way to solve this." Everyone tried to talk past her argument, but privately, They each knew that she was making a valid point. But they were all very afraid of what would happen if they started to argue with one another. They felt they needed to maintain a united front. But Heidi didn't back down. She said, "You're all from famous families in Baltimore, but you're letting them push you around. This compromise is not going to pay off. You were so brave before. What happened?" The students stopped whispering their arguments, and from their faces, it was clear that her words shamed them. She was making good points. They wanted to be brave again, but Mickey's return and the sight of all those weapons had shaken them. Ted shook his head. "You guys, don't get caught up in your ideals. This is the reality of the situation. We have to deal with it." He didn't care how he looked. He just wanted to survive. Some of the students sided with Ted again, but some of them still felt Heidi had made a good point. She had successfully split the group with her argument. Ted looked around at his classmates nervously. He worried that the gang would get violent with them if they didn't sort this out soon. His classmate Davy was sitting near him. Davy was a big guy, but a bit short on brains. However, he was inspired by Heidi's words and disappointed at how quick Ted had been to surrender to the gang. His face turned a little red, and he said, "Heidi's right. We have good reputations and we're throwing them away. We have to do better. I'll call my dad and see what he has to say." Ted panicked and elbowed his friend hard. "Are you crazy? Keep your voice down." Davy covered his mouth on instinct, but he wasn't convinced. He was very impressed with Heidi and her bravery, and he wanted to match her. He worried that if words spread around the city that they had just given up and let this gang win, he would never be able to do anything great ever again. He beckoned to the other students. "Cover me," he said quietly. "I'm calling my dad." The students crowded close to him, surrounding him as he dialed his father's number. There was no need for him to be so cautious. The gang members didn't care if the students made phone calls. They assumed that the students would need to call for help to raise the money. Davy soon got his father on the phone. "Dad, my friends and I were at the race course, but this gang showed up. This is their territory. They're asking for a lot of money, and they've all got weapons." Davy winced at the sound of his voice. He sounded like he was whining. He wished he sounded braver. But when his father responded, he sounded anxious and frightened too. "What do you mean? Did you mess with a gang? Why would you do that?" Mr. March swore angrily. "It's like you to go out trying to get into trouble. Why did you get yourself into all that?" "But, Dad..." It was too late. His father had already hung up. Davy stared down at his phone in shock. It had never occurred to him that his father would be terrified of the gang too. Now the other students began to panic. Since the gang had done nothing to stop Davy from making his phone call, they figured it was safe to call their parents too. One by one, they called and were scolded by their parents. Ted also tried making a call. His father shouted at him before hanging up the phone. Episode 394, Alternative Offers. Heidi was the only one who didn't make a call. She was determined to solve her problems by herself. She was still very angry with Alex, who continued to stand on the sidelines, refusing to help. She had built up a fantasy version of him in her head, based on his performance on the fight on TV. She was finding the real version of him to be a huge disappointment. Even disgusting gang members like Mickey were too much for him. The students huddled together like helpless hostages, trying to think of ways to raise money. It was clear their parents weren't going to be much help. Debbie turned to Alex and gave him an anxious, earnest look. Alex smiled back at her. He still wasn't in a hurry to help. He didn't like the way Heidi had tried to use him, or how the students had assumed he was there to provide a service for nothing. He also wanted to make sure that all learned a valuable lesson before he stepped in. "Time's up," Sonny announced. Mickey sprang up from his chair. "Those phone calls didn't sound too promising. Kinda sounds to me like money can't solve everything after all. I guess we'll just have to find another way to make you pay." The fighters surrounding the students drew their knives menacingly. But before anyone could move, a voice called out. "Okay, wait a moment." The students craned their necks, trying to see who had called out on their behalf. Soon they realized that the person was Alex. He looked calm and indifferent in the face of the gang and their weapons. He stepped forward as if nothing was wrong. "What?" Ted was shocked by Alex's calm temperament. There was something about him that was even more impressive than Heidi's fire and strong spirit. Alex seemed to have a complete sense of peace about him, despite the threats of violence he was facing. "It's okay," Alex said to him. "I'm going to talk to these people and sort something out." "Are you kidding me?" Heidi demanded. She had lost hope of Alex doing much. But now that he had volunteered to do something, she assumed he would be offering to fight. Instead, he was just saying he was going to talk. Mickey leaned forward on his crutches. "What was that?" The students all watched Alex doubtfully. They still felt that he was a coward for not helping them before. Even the girls who had tried to speak up in his defense didn't think he'd be able to do much to help them. Davy spoke up and called to Alex. "Hey, no need to get yourself hurt, okay? We're trying to solve this the adult way. You don't have to come out now and pretend to be a big tough guy." "Yeah, who do you think you are all of a sudden?" Ted asked. He was too scared to argue with Mickey's gang. But he thought Alex was weak, so he had no problem arguing with him. A couple of other students began to laugh amongst themselves. "I mean, seriously, what does he think he's going to do now? He wasn't willing to fight when we were all working together. Now he thinks he can do something on his own? This is a joke." Debbie's beautiful face took on an angry expression as she listened to them belittle Alex. She regretted asking Alex to help them. Ted shook his head. "Okay, you've had your moment in the spotlight. Now we need to do the real work and figure out how to take care of this money." But Heidi ignored him. She kept her gaze fixed on Alex and said, "Okay, so now you want to help. Then help. Speak up." Alex gave Heidi a small, dignified nod. Then he turned to Debbie and gave her his phone, asking her quietly to send a message to him. Then he turned back to the gang and gazed at Mickey without speaking. Mickey was thrown off by Alex's sudden change of heart. He found the calm way Alex staring at him unnerving. But he tried to bluster through the moment. "Nice of you to start paying attention, I guess," he shouted. "So, are you going to chip into the fund or what?" A few of the students shivered. The more they thought about it, the more they understood that they were not going to be able to come up with the money. It was unbearable to them to argue drawn out so long. Even the richest ones knew it would be very difficult to produce that much money in cash up front. Getting the money could require selling cars, property, and even business shares. They knew Mickey would probably not be satisfied with excuses like that. Davy decided to try reasoning with him. That's a lot of money to produce up front. What about an installment plan? We could start with a few million and then keep paying it off. Mickey cut him off with a slap across the face. An installment plan? Are you kidding me? You're not in a position to negotiate. Davy clutched his cheek. Mickey had left a bright handprint across his entire face. In the background, Alex sighed and stepped back again. Davy had disrupted his attempt to help. He would have to wait for another opportunity to step in. I'm just trying to tell you the facts, Davy said desperately. Getting you $1 billion right this second is impossible. You have to know that. He looked at the other students, thinking that someone else would step up to support him. But the students turned away, too ashamed to look at him. They appreciated Davy for taking the initiative to speak up, but none of them felt bold enough to join him. Fine. Forget the money then. We'll find other ways for you to pay. We can start with fingers and toes, Mickey said. Then he glanced at some of the girls and leered. And for a lucky few, we can get a little more creative. After saying this, he reached out and grabbed Heidi's arm. Looking over the crowd, he spotted Debbie standing off to the side, and his smile grew wider. I think I might prefer this payment plan after all. With this insult, finally, Alex felt it was time to get involved. Mickey barely noticed that he had finally inspired Alex to action. He was too focused on Heidi, who was now trying to pull away from him. Although she was a very strong fighter, she was still a young girl and quite sheltered. Most of the people in her life spoke to her very respectfully. She had never had to deal with a man being so disgusting and rude to her. She was so flustered she was having a hard time focusing on fighting him off. Her young face was red with anger and humiliation. Mickey thought she looked prettier than ever when she looked angry. Hey, don't be shy. We're going to have a good time, you and me. The gang members all laughed as Heidi continued to struggle. Episode 395, Reinforcements. The students who had been so excited to ask Heidi for a date and show off their strength to her watched helplessly as she struggled against Mickey's grip. None of them felt strong enough to help her at that moment. It was incredible to them that Mickey could still wield so much power even with a broken leg. By rights, it should have been easy to overpower him. But he had a wild, dangerous personality. Being injured didn't seem like an obstacle to him. Heidi's face burned furiously. She was not exactly afraid of Mickey, but the combination of his lewd suggestions and the staring eyes of everyone watching her being harassed made her freeze up. She felt as if she had never studied martial arts in her life. Finally, desperately, she yelled for help. She didn't know who she was hoping would help her. The other students were useless, and her hero, Alex, had turned out to be a huge disappointment. But then, suddenly, a cold voice said, "Let her go." It was Alex. Everyone froze. His voice was calm and unfussed, but it carried a great deal of power. It felt very different from his earlier attempt to intervene. This time it felt like he meant it. A few of the girls amongst the students exchanged knowing glances, though. It was clear to them that Alex had only stepped forward again because Heidi was in trouble. Maybe he was only willing to help if he got a pretty girl out of it. Mickey glared at him. He was terrified of Alex, though he could not quite explain why. He didn't recognize him from the fight on TV, and he didn't know about Alex's other exploits and triumphs. But something in the way he carried himself set Mickey's teeth on edge. But he also knew he couldn't back down. There were too many people watching him. So now what, huh? He pushed Heidi toward his fighter so they could restrain her while he focused on Alex. He held up his hand to his ear as if he was struggling to hear Alex. What was that you said? It seems to me that you just want to be a hero all of a sudden so you can get the girl. Mickey laughed wildly. But Alex didn't bat an eye. He didn't seem to be too bothered by Mickey at all. I said, let her go, said Alex. And by that I meant unhand her. Not hand her off to more of your guys. A few of the fighters flexed their arms menacingly, but Alex wasn't interested in them. After the kinds of fighters he had faced and beaten, these people were nothing more than yapping dogs to him. I don't think you've really thought this through, said Mickey. Alex shrugged and stuck his hands in his pockets. I'll just say this once. Forget the money. Leave the girls alone. Get out of here. Oh, sure, we'll just leave, Mickey sneered. He waved a hand in the air, signaling to the gang members that it was time to attack. All right, guys, you know what to do. He knew it was time to wrap things up. His boss was still watching from the car. Several big men stepped toward Alex. But before the fight could begin in earnest, Heidi screamed, Stop! Please let me fix it! Everyone froze. Mickey turned to her with a grin. You're going to fix it? How are you going to fix it? He had some ideas of what he wanted Heidi to do for him, but he was curious to see what she was willing to offer. Heidi took a deep, shaky breath. Even though she was still angry at Alex, she couldn't let him get hurt for her. She had gone to a lot of trouble to meet him because she thought he must be an impressive person. She had been thrilled by his fights on TV. She had been mistaken, but that wasn't his fault. In some ways, she felt responsible for dragging him into all this. Let's spend some time together, she said slowly, keeping her gaze fixed on Mickey. Away from everyone else. Let these people go so I can be alone with you. I have a lot to learn, but I bet you can teach me something, right? The students gasped. They were in awe of her bravery and willingness to sacrifice herself for them. Some of the boys were ashamed. Heidi had turned out to be much braver than any of them. Debbie watched Heidi's face carefully, deeply concerned for her safety. She was impressed by the girl's bravery, but she was horrified that Heidi felt she had to sacrifice herself in such a way to protect others. Done, Mickey said, unable to hide his excitement. We're going to have a great time. He turned and winked at the other members of his gang. They all started to step back, allowing the kneeling students space to stand up. A few of them glanced at Alex nervously, wondering if he was finally going to do something. He smiled back at them. Even though he wasn't moving a muscle, something about his confident stance calmed them. Suddenly, one of the gang members shouted, Look, Mickey, over there! Mickey's head snapped up. Oh, what now? It's all finally starting to get good. But look, the gang member called out desperately. Over there! What is that? Everyone turned their heads to look in the direction he was pointing. A few of them had to squint against the sunlight. It almost looked as if a dark cloud was heading toward them on the horizon. Then a dull, repetitive thudding noise began to reverberate across the field. The dark blob spread, and as it drew closer, it became clear that it was not a cloud, but an enormous group of people. The thudding noise was their footsteps. The students' eyes widened in astonishment at the sight of the group approaching them. Debbie glanced down at Alex's phone. The message she had quietly typed and sent out was still visible on the screen. No one had texted back, but they didn't need to. The huge group of people coming out to help was their reply.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.